Hey, Bomb Squad. If you're a comedian or a podcaster looking for an affordable website solution with a modern look, then we recommend Puck's Hub. With a Puck's Hub website, you can set up your new website in minutes with easy-to-use pre-built templates. Puck's Hub websites are customizable and can easily be integrated with other platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. The best part? Puck's Hub plans are only $5 per month. We use Puck's Hub for our website at the Art of Bombing podcast, and we think you should too. That's why we've partnered with Puck's Hub to offer listeners a free 60-day trial. Head over to puckshub.com to subscribe and use promo code AOBPOD at checkout for your 60-day free trial, and then pay only $5 per month after that. Take your career to the next level with your own Puck's Hub website today.
Dan Bublitz Comedy Productions.
My friend Dan, he's got a podcast, 'cause all comics need a podcast, and nobody had a podcast called The Art of Bombing. So Dan went out and bought a tape deck. Who knows why he bought a tape deck? Podcasts don't get played on tape decks, but Dan is from the 80s. So hey there, all you funny jerks, come talk to Dan about your work. Tell him all about your worst times. It's The Art of Bombing.
Welcome to the Art of Bombing presents Between Bombs Callbacks, where we call back the most recent episode. This week, we are calling back episode 274, which happens to be, it was recorded live at the Chief Comedy Festival last week, and it was our 6-year anniversary. Wow, Josh, 6 years.
It was amazing. I remember that episode like it was yesterday. Now,
oh, man.
You said on the show I wasn't fired, and that's true, everybody. I was not fired. I quit. I quit the show because no one had the balls to fire me. So I left. I packed my stuff and I left, and Dan had to do the intro by himself on our 6th anniversary, mind you.
I know. It was like an important episode, and you were just like, you know what? I'm done. I don't know why I took you back.
That's not the first anniversary I missed, Dan. Let me tell you.
Well, that's true, because you haven't been with us since the beginning, but, you were with us in spirit.
I was talking about, like, first date
just
anniversaries and wedding anniversaries. Been a little light on those in the past as well, and it's gone over.
So maybe there's a pattern here.
It's me.
It sounds like, it's you. Okay, there's a pattern. You just don't
there is a pattern, and I deserve to be fired about it. And
all right,
people, you guys got to do something.
Yeah, fire Josh. Go to buymeacoffee.com/AOBpod and throw a little tip in the coffee pot and fire Josh. Just do it. Write a message on how you would fire Josh, and we will read it on air. But yeah, happy anniversary to us. I still can't believe that it's been 6 years. And I thought the episode that we did, live from the Chief Comedy Festival and Train Tour was a perfect episode to do for the anniversary. I just thought that would be cool. In my vision of how I want the show, a live Art of Bombing to go, it was a little different than, I'm working on something where I want to do like a live in front of an audience where it's a hybrid show. It's like one part stand-up, one part little interview.
It's like a tiny desk.
Exactly. Yep. That's exactly kind of what I want to do with it.
I like it.
Yeah. And so that's, something we're going to try to do in the future is it's essentially a tiny desk. That's what the live Art of Bombing Live will be. But nonetheless, this was still recorded live. There was a small audience of comedians that kept rotating through and watching the podcast. It was great. And the guests were amazing. It was a lot. There was a lot to take in this week because we had a lot of different perspectives because we had 4 guests on the show. And I don't know if I've ever had at one time 4 guests on the show at once. Like I've done other live episodes in the past where did have him do a little stand up, and then we did chat for a little bit. But even them, I think I only kept it to like 3 guests. Maybe I did 4. I don't remember. But this was a fun conversation. I was having a good time at the comedy festival. And you were handling family stuff last weekend.
Yeah. Had some things going on that prevented me from recording that, but
What happened? Well, here we are. We're calling back. There's a lot of info to take in. One of the things that came up that we wanted to really touch on is lashing out at people when your set's not going your way, and you feel like the audience isn't with you, or somebody's, even if they are being a jerk. You got to be careful when you lash out at people, because that's lashing out at somebody, especially if you don't do it in a humorous way, is a quick way to lose the whole audience. Even if that said person was kind of being a dirtbag, for lack of a better word. I couldn't think of it. Like, even if they were being a dirtbag, but yeah.
In the clean lexicon. Well, that says something, Dan. Like you went for a clean word to call someone and you couldn't find one, which means you don't use those words very often. Yeah. Dirtbag's a great one. If you're going to go clean and you want to like call somebody a name that you don't like, dirtbag is right up there.
There it is. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, but if somebody's being a dirtbag, you still have to be very diligent on how you handle it, because, you could lose the audience. But in this episode, Amira had an example of a situation where she just focused on the one person that wasn't smiling through her set, and then finally lashed out at that person, and then tried to make, and made fun of them and so on and so forth. And then it turned out that they weren't smiling, not because they didn't want to, but they couldn't because they had a stroke.
Yeah. That's it. You learn as you go on things. I think her instinct was in the right place. And for context, I actually know Amira. She came up in the Kansas City scene. She's been doing some comedy for a few years. So I know her and her hetero life partner that she moved to Chicago with. In fact, I was going to have her on the show that you did.
Oh, really?
Here in town. Yeah, I actually put out something to her to see if she could do it, and she was moving. She was in the middle of moving when that was going on. So that's how it ties into this.
Oh, that's wild. We almost did a show together and we didn't know it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But she's someone who's naturally does crowd work very well. And so I don't think that it's a byproduct of her not knowing what she's doing. I think it's just a situation where you just kind of called out the wrong person. Usually that goes over really well. And you asked her on the episode, were they with you before that? And they were, and then it all turned around.
Yeah. As soon as they found out what was going, yeah. And it's amazing because that'll happen. But it's amazing how easy it is for us to forget that we don't know when an audience comes into, and becomes a collective audience. We don't know where they were before they came, or what kind of mindset or mood they're in, or, what they're stressing about before they come into the show, and so it's, ultimately you just need to be funny and entertain them and try not to, project, I guess, onto them, because you don't know what's gonna happen. I mean, obviously you can't prevent everything, because there are times where you tell a joke that offends somebody because they've been affected by whatever the subject material is, and there's nothing in that situation you're going to be able to do, because we don't know where they came from, what was happening, and Dan, he had a story too. His story was about a host show that was kind of bombing, and it was the same kind of scenario where it had to do, not so much lashing out, but it had to do with like a heckler, and, and in that case, it was the material. It was the joke that they didn't like. The couple that he was talking about didn't like that particular joke that somebody was telling, and then made it, even more difficult.
Yeah. It's difficult sometimes to read the room and move on from somebody who really isn't engaging. I mean, if you are going to do crowd work, and you're going to use crowd work to turn around a disengaged person, they almost have to be on board, or they do, like if they're not going to engage with you, or the rest of the audience doesn't get something out of it, it's not worth it.
And you're right. It isn't worth it. I mean, you really got to, and you got to do it quick because it's like in the heat of the moment, but you kind of got to evaluate, is it worth the payoff? The risk. You got to weigh the risk versus the reward, and you got to do it in, quick, because you're right there right now in the moment. And one, wrong word couldn't totally derail the whole show. Because that's a thing too that we don't think about when we're on stage. We think about it's us now. We're trying to be in the present, which is great. But you also got to consider that, especially unless you're the last comic on the show. But if you're in the middle of the show, there's still other comedians coming out,
right?
And if you ruin you could ruin the show for them, and that has happened. There was one of my favorite bombing stories that ever took place on. That was told on this podcast was one where somebody walked the room, and he wasn't the last comic. So then there was still another comic that had to go follow him after he walked most of the people in the room, which,
So it's interesting, it's true in comedy. It's true. And if you perform in some other art form like dance, theater, you're a public speaker, there's something about the not engaging face that we are magnetized to. So, that makes me wonder, in the calculus of performance, if you're drawn to that person, then everybody else must be having a good time.
So, yeah. Oh, absolutely. And we talked about that before. Oh, sorry.
Well, I think at least in a couple of these, like in Dan's story, it didn't sound like things were going well for him at all. And so he's trying to turn
for the whole show, it sounded like.
Right. Yeah. It wasn't going anywhere, and he kind of went for broke, and it sounds like at the level where if it's not going well for him, it's probably not going well for the rest of the people on the show either. So we got to try something.
Yep,
but
definitely do. What do you do? Because this is the thing with, and like I said, this is where I was going to go, is that we've talked about this before, where we end up hyper focusing on that one person that's not enjoying it, even though 99 other people are having a good time. And one of the things we say is when that happens, to try to focus on the people that are enjoying it, but it's sometimes easier said than done. But have you ever caught yourself in one of those moments where you're focusing on that one person, and then you were able to snap yourself out of it? And
I think every show I'm tempted to call out the person who's not engaged. There's always going to be somebody who's not engaged. I mean, if you're Tom Segura, you're going to have somebody who's not engaged, right? Somebody is there because of circumstances that you don't know, right? That's just how it is.
Yep, absolutely.
And more often, I've been thankful when I've been presented with all the information later that I didn't call somebody specifically out. If the show's going fine, then I'm good to get right. So I was doing a show. I think it was last year. I was doing a show, and this woman in the back, after every punchline, she would turn to her husband and whisper something. And so in my comics brain, I was like, okay, she hates this, and she's telling him how much she hates this. She hates me, and she probably just is just kind of asking him, how much longer do I have to be here? So I was featuring, and I had the headliner go up after me. I get down, and I actually, this sounds like I was really trying to eavesdrop, but I ended up just being in the same part of the room as that couple. And so I actually,
you were just like, I'm going to go see if they really,
I gotta see what the hell's going on with this lady.
I gotta see what she's saying about me.
So she kept doing it. I noticed she kept doing it when the headliner was up. And I was like, okay. And then I realized she doesn't hear very well. She's turning to her husband to ask what the punchline was, if she heard it correctly, so she could enjoy it.
Wow. Yeah.
That's why she was turning and asking and like whispering after every joke.
But in your brain, she didn't like me.
She didn't. She, she should be up there, not me. This is the worst thing ever. And I think we assume the worst intentions for people. So, when I recall Amira's story, I go in on a lady who isn't laughing, but she's not laughing because of an actual physical disability. And so if we think with the best intentions, we don't go there. But like you said, it's so much easier said than done. And I do this. Like I see people not engaging and I go right at them. Or I to your point, sometimes I'm able to stop myself. And in the times where I have stopped myself, and then I've been able to understand later why the person wasn't engaging. And in that, like, I'm filtering on a lot of stuff here, but in that little data set, I am glad I didn't do
it. Yeah. Yep. Because that after it would have went bad, and I just kind of, you were talking earlier too about how Amira, a lot of her, she was doing crowd work and stuff and started picking on the person and they weren't really responding either. That's another situation too, where we talked about that in the crowd work episode where, you move on. If somebody's not talking back when you're trying to do crowd work, just keep going. Don't make them be part of the show because that's going to help derail that as well. Another thing that came up, which was another story from one of the comics, Sarah, which, her bombing story was pretty hilarious in a lot of ways. Also sad in a lot of ways because, her bombing story was she was using a Bane voice changer, and what had happened was the audience couldn't hear her talking. She could hear herself, but they couldn't hear her talk. So for like 4 minutes, it was just her up on stage and nothing but silence. Now, to me, that's hilarious because that I would have thought if I was, but granted, we're comics, so we'll think differently. But if I was in the audience and I saw that, I would have thought that was the bit. Like I would have been like, oh, this is some Andy Kaufman stuff going on here and very hilarious because they're
stuff.
Still doing it. Like after 1 minute, I'd be like, really? They're going all in. And then 2 minutes, 3 minutes, then the host set.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm listening. Yeah. I think that's something that we forget too, is if the audience isn't coming along, it's not personal. They just don't understand. Like they want to,
or they might not be able to hear you. There's a lot of variables that come into place with that. But one thing I didn't like about her story is that the reason she had tried to do something different with her voice is she was trying to get in with a booker who I think was involved with this show. And that particular booker had flat out told her he didn't like the sound of her voice. And so it made her self-conscious of her voice that she was trying to go out of her way to change it.
Right.
She did some research on chemicals she could have used. She was trying to find use, and then ultimately ended up going with the mask. But again, like to me, that's what really, really irked me because, I get it if, we want to try to be honest with people, but there's being honest with people about like, being real with them in their comedy and then straight out just being mean. And if somebody can't do anything about, if it's their actual voice or the way they look or, something that they can't change, leave it alone. If you don't like it, that's fine. Just don't say anything,
Well, I don't know. It sounded like this was a booker who is essentially in charge of booking the comics. And the booker's running a business and the business needs to make money. And the booker's making a decision that I don't like your voice. Therefore, I don't think you're going to be a suitable product to sell to this business. Not personal, but I don't like your voice. Now, I'm assuming that it's not about her and it's not personal, and that is purely a business decision being made.
Well, when she told the story, I didn't get that vibe. I got the vibe he was kind of being a dick. Because
sure, and I'm totally with you that he's being a dick. I'm just making the point that as a comic, like, we can decide who
Oh,
we
yeah,
work with and who
absolutely.
we don't. We can make
Yeah.
those same decisions.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. That's a good point. I see where you're going with that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. As comedians, we can choose who we work with and who we don't. And I think we should be thinking more about that stuff, because there are a lot of comedians that do a lot of gigs in their career because they feel like they have to.
Yes.
They feel like they have to do this, whatever the gig is, so they can get in with a certain booker or try to make that connection. And a lot of times, the connection ain't that great anyway, or it doesn't work out. And you end up having to work with somebody that you wouldn't normally work with, just because they're not, you don't vibe on a personal level, or on a social level, as far as culturally. And what I mean by that is, especially with politics right now, there are a lot of people that are divided or whatever, even in comedy. But you might, work with somebody that's a known shock comic that you don't want to work with, but
Yeah.
you do a gig because you're hope, that ends up putting you in a situation where you work with said comic that you don't want to work with, because you're trying to impress somebody. You don't have to, like I said, there's power, you got the power to decide who you work with. And there's the best power in comedy is the power and the ability to say no.
Yeah.
Not every gig is worth it.
Yeah.
You
We've
don't need to.
talked about how to
We
make
have.
it.
Yep.
Yeah. Like how to be profitable. I mean, if you've made the decision in your life that you're going to support yourself in this business, you're going to make money in comedy, then you're past the point of doing comedy just to gain experience. And you have
Exactly.
to be. You
Exactly.
have to be.
And you have.
Because you have to make business decisions every
Mhm.
day.
I
And
was
if
just gonna say
somebody's a
that.
jerk, if
Yep.
this isn't going to be fun, it's like going to work at a type job with a manager that you can't stand.
Mhm.
I mean, that's essentially what it is. And
Oh, yeah.
shame on the guy for, saying, look, yeah, I can't stand the sound of your voice. No way. I mean, that's mean.
Yeah.
But, then, she's trying to be accommodating and trying to make it work. But I think that belief system that you're talking about there is in a lot of comics, where we have to take every gig or we're doing something
Yep.
wrong.
That's how we feel. Yep. But again, you don't. That's the
Yep.
beauty. You
That's
just
right.
have to weigh the risk versus the reward. And is it good for you got to make, like you said, you got to make business decisions, and you got to make sure when you're making a decision that you weigh out all the pros and cons of that business decision. And, in these situations, if it's puts you in a situation where you have to work with somebody that's, maybe a little sleazy, and when I say sleazy, I don't mean like a dirty comic. I just mean like, a booker that treats people like
Mhm.
shit, and
Yeah.
is known for treating people like shit. Even if they book a bunch of stuff, if enough comics stop working with them, they're
Yeah.
eventually going to get, pushed out of the business,
That's right.
you
That's
know?
right. I mean,
Uh,
yeah, I think we all owe it to ourselves not to work for somebody who treats us like shit. And that's the
yeah. Yeah. Never compromise your own dignity.
right.
It's not worth it. At the end of the day, it's not worth it. Because if it was, comedy would pay a lot more than it does, but it still pays the same as it does in the that it did in the '80s. So
Right. Yeah. See, and costs have not stayed the same.
exactly, value yourself. Don't be afraid to say no. Pick and choose who you work with. If somebody makes you uncomfortable, don't work with them. If somebody's mean to you and you don't like them, don't work. You don't have to work with them. You don't have to do these things. So. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for this episode of the Callbacks. We appreciate you guys listening. Thanks again so much for continuing to support this podcast for the last 6 years. I'm not going to say here's to the next 6, because who knows?
Mm.
This could be the last episode we ever put out.
Oh my
I don't
gosh.
know. I know it's not, because I've already got like 4 or 5 in the bank. But that said, thank you so much for supporting us. And we'll be back next week with an all new episode. Our next guest next week is Mark Masters. He is the guy behind the Vail Comedy Show and the Vail Comedy Festival in Vail, Colorado. And we had a great chat before we were getting ready to go do a show together. So that's what's coming up next week. And we'll see you then. Have a great weekend.
This has been a Dan Bublitz comedy production. Roar.